It is 9 o'clock, so good evening and welcome everybody to this abbreviated version of what I usually do here. This is Introduction to the Great Campaigns of the American Civil War. My name is Patrick. Hello. We're supposed to have, I guess, seven. There's more people showing up now, so welcome everybody. I am recording this, so this will be out on my channel. If you don't know that I have a channel, that's okay. Hopefully by the end of this session you will know that I have a channel, and the link to which is right there in my profile for Discord. I've been doing this now for 4 years. The Great Campaigns of the American Civil War was really the genesis of my channel. Way back before I had a channel, 10 years ago now, I got a wild hair and somebody loaned me their video screen capture software account. One January in 2013, I decided there's some really good materials on there, but that's not the way that I learn well with Great Campaigns, and I figured other people are out there like me, so I thought it really could use a video tutorial series. And I sat down on paper and essentially went through what was some really great web tutorials that took all the information and distilled it into some really nice component chunks. I thought they were very digestible, and I essentially went through those as a love letter to that website and used it as an opportunity for other people to learn perhaps easier than I did when I was first getting into this. This was really the first opportunity I ever had to play an operations level Civil War game. It was during that exploration of, do I really like grand strategic games like For the People, or do I want to play Terrible Swift Sword for the tactical level? And this was the Goldilocks for me. This was the sweet spot right there in between. This is everything that I've come to love. I think in wargaming in general, I think this is a wonderful scale, and it really scratches that itch for me. So I'm hoping that something that you'll take away from this tonight is whether or not this system works for you, be it for your enjoyment of the American Civil War and historical things, or just perhaps for the wargaming scale. Either way, hopefully you will take something away from you there, and perhaps even a little bit of basic knowledge on how the gameplay works. And that's what we're going to do here tonight. I've got essentially an outline script that I'm going to go through. Again, this is an abbreviated version of what I really spent about 5 hours doing over the series. And some good news on that front is technology has improved, and hopefully my presentation skills have improved over 10 years. And I'm in the process of redoing all of those. I found that some of the other web content creators on YouTube that I really like and appreciate, they've done sort of the same things where they do a redux of things that were a passion project for them. And I'm no exception to that. I feel that there's an opportunity here to redo all of that, fine-tune, and improve upon some things, and maybe for a new generation of people we can do that. This is really open-ended. If you have questions, again, as we're going along, if I'm explaining things too obtusely, then I want you to call me on it, stop me, and engage the dialogue here. If you have a question, I will certainly be happy to answer it on the fly. That being said, I'm going to try to take this very briskly. I'm not going to spend as much time as I would normally do, but we've got 90 minutes here. But my time is your time. It's your opportunity. So let's get started then. We are on the Vassal module here. Some of you, I see we got 3 people in the Vassal room. So you may be my unwitting volunteers for this if we decide to do some actual gameplay. What we're looking at here is the Grant Takes Command 2 module. These are maintained by a wonderful Spaniard named Alberto Romero, who for the last 3 or 4 years, he is a big fan of Great Campaigns, and he has vassal skills, and those two great things that go great together, he maintains these for us. And as the playtest products come out from Multiman Publishing, in each one of these over the last 3 or 4 years, he is right there from the playtesting process, getting the maps and the components all built into Vassal, and he's even taken it a step further, which we see in this module, where there's a bit of automation that is added into these. If you're following along on Vassal, when I open up a window, you're certainly invited to do the same. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the tools, but suffice to say that there are charts and materials that you need, resources for each of the components in the rules are here. They're wonderful. These are pretty standard in each of the Great Campaigns modules that Alberto maintains. He does have a standard which works really, really well as far as the buttons and the layouts and the charts and all that. So everything is at your disposal, and in concert with the materials that you can get online for free from Multi-Man Publishing. Just in the last few months, not only did they have the standard series rules, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they now have released all of the individual resources for the titles that they publish. Everything beyond, I think, Grant Takes Command forward, so essentially Stonewall Jackson's Way, Battle Above the Clouds forward. They have actually put the specific rule books for those out on the website, on the mmpgamers.com site. Those are all available in the resources that you can download. So a wealth of information available for you to just go back through. But what we're going to do here tonight is go through just some of the very basics, and I think for the first half of this, so the first 45 minutes or so, we'll talk about basic rules, and then we'll talk about, in the second half, we'll get more and more involved in it. So stop me at any time, but here we go. Great Campaign System was the brainchild of Joe Balkowski, came out in 1992, so I'm guessing after his Fleet series he decided he wanted to delve into the Civil War era, and the first title was Stonewall Jackson's Way, and now here we are, all these years later, 31 years and 13 titles. They've re-released some of them, so Stonewall Jackson's Way has now been re-released 10 years ago, and for each time that they re-release one of these titles, they bundle it and they add value and they make improvements and they put more modules in it. So you're really, the price point of course is going up now, but you're getting more and more materials. And the most recent one is Volume 13, which just came out a few months ago. That is On to Richmond 2. That's where Grant Takes Command 2 is part of that. It used to be its standalone title, but they bundled all of the Peninsula and Overland campaign information and then added a third module for the Petersburg, so 1864 into the end of war, 1865. All three of those are in there, so it makes for an incredibly dense package, but also well worth the value. The best place to start for this is the maps, the Charlie Kibler maps, which are packaged in here. I think he's done all but one of the series maps. At one point he was not available, and so they got Rick Barber to do the original Grant Takes Command maps. They are created from period maps, so they went back and in the archives of each of these state capitals, I know in the Virginia State House they have access to a lot of these old county and census maps from the 1860s. So those were the source of all these materials, and then with the wonderful artistic capability for these, we get very rich, very deluxe looking maps here. And as you can see, there's a road network, and we're going to see that's pretty important. The game pieces, I will warn you, here on Vassal, we're using a variation of which Alberto came up with a couple of years ago, which for people who play this almost exclusively online like myself, it's fantastic. We call this the all-in-one. So normally if you have your physical copy, you've got markers for several aspects of the units. You have the unit descriptor here. For example, I've got Griffin. It's got all of the information about that unit, but you'll also have a manpower value token which sits underneath that, and you'll have a fatigue level, and all of that has been incorporated here into one piece, which makes for, in Vassal you don't have to worry about stacks anyway, but even here where I've got Grant, I've got multiple units all kind of stacked onto each other. If we were using this on the table, each one of these units would potentially have manpower counters and fatigue counters, so they can get a little unwieldy. That is a common concern for players who play this on the table. But looking at these, obviously we've got blue for Union, we've got butternut or gray for the Confederate. We have three types of units here. We're going to talk about them each. We'll start with the most basic is the infantry unit here with the infantry symbol, the NATO symbol. It will tell you the division general. It will tell you the corps affiliation here. And across the bottom there are three pieces of information. Again, this is all conflated into a single unit here. We've got the manpower. In this case, Griffin is a 17 manpower unit. His division has each one of those manpower points represents 500 men. So in this case, this is about 8,500 men, right? The unit next to it is the default tactical capability of Griffin. If he was just by himself and engaging in combat, he has a tactical capability of 2. And then the right number is the number of artillery batteries that are attached to that division. Each one of the divisions will have anywhere from 0 to, I think in this title, it's up to 4 maximum, and that represents several, I think 2 or 3 groups of batteries that are attached. That's the individual infantry unit. Right next to it, we've got the 1st North Carolina with its cavalry unit. You can see that there are designators of size, so in this case it's a regiment. We've got the 2 X's, which represent the divisions. I don't know that I have any brigades out here. There are some scattered. Some of the smaller ones you'll see around that. Here, well, Custer's got a Stuart over here. Stuart over here near Morton's Ford. He is a brigade level. I think the smallest unit, for the most part, in these titles is regiments up to the division. The Confederates do have a demi-division in some of the titles, but you don't see them in all of them, and they are kind of halfway in between a division and a brigade. So we got the cavalry here. Again, those units are essentially laid out the same way. You've got the manpower here to the left. You've got the tactical with the colored background, and then any artillery to the right. And then whichever associated corps or division that they are part of, or brigade in this case. So this is W.H. Lee. He controls those, and that gives you an indicator, if you're looking around the map, which unit is associated with which leadership for subordinate control. So here we've got Ewell, and he's got 3 individual divisions in his corps. Leaders are the next part of this. Each leader, beyond just the division leaders, you have an overall corps commander. So the Confederates here in the wilderness have the 3 individual corps. So the 1st Corps is Longstreet. Down here with Lee is A.P. Hill. 3rd Corps, and then 2nd Corps is Ewell. And you can see they only have 2 numbers on them, and those are different than the actual infantry units. The larger number there in the colored background is their individual tactical, so that is comparable. In this case here, where he is stacked with a particular unit for the purposes of attack or defense, whenever they are attached to a unit that is being attacked or they are making the attack, you will use the best leadership. In this case, Ewell's leadership of 4 would supersede that of Johnson's, so you would use that in combat. And then the small number is not the number of artillery batteries attached to him. It's actually his command ability. That's his command value. And we'll see that when he is trying to attempt an assault, you will make a roll against that to see if it succeeds, and if so, how many units that he is attempting to activate would then participate in the assault. We'll get to that when we get to combat, of course. So that is your basic unit, and then of course we have the 2 army leaders. We've got Grant up here for the Union, and we got Lee down here. Notice they have just a single number, and that is their capability for engaging in a grand assault. So it is possible not only to just start a small assault and attack somebody, but with those army leaders nearby, they could issue orders that would then allow multiple hexes to all participate into a single attack to improve your odds, to improve your overall numbers. There's a lot of reasons that you may want to do that. I'll circle back to the terrain on the maps here. We have everything from the yellow here where I'm clicking clear to light green here, which is rolling. Anything with a light green but speckled, that's rough terrain. Forests here. And in some cases, I'm going to move off to the western part of the map here towards the Rapidan. We have hills, and hills are interesting because they did not exist in the original series of games. And so this is one of those aspects that you'll need to retrofit. A lot of people ask, should I go back and buy some of the original titles that were released from Avalon Hill? Because you can often get those quite cheaply online. If you go into any of the social media marketplaces, you can get Stonewall Jackson's Way for 20 or 30 bucks. people are like, well, am I missing out if I don't get the new stuff? Not at all. You can certainly get those. Just keep in mind that there are some changes to the map since 2009 with Battle Above the Clouds, where they created this new terrain type called hills. In the original version of this, Buzzard Mountain was actually what you see here, this full-on mountain. Mountains are impassable, but hills are less stringent, and so they are available. You can actually move units into them, and they give some defensive capability. So you can actually get those caissons up onto Buzzard Mountain, and you can defend that hex, whereas in the original map, you would see that as a mountain, and that's not available. Let's see, we have mountains as I pointed out here. They're often named. And as we move down the Mattapony, let's see, we've got swamps and provisional swamps. Oops, I clicked too far there. So we've got some hexes that are...
Patrick, just a question back with the hills. So to the right of that hill, there's like what looks like another hill where it says 63 plus. Is that also a hill?
What a great question. That is a readout hex. So those are printed on the map. And what they've done is, instead of having extra counters for those, in some cases where, and you'll see that down on the southern map here, we're not using that for the wilderness here, but down near Richmond, there's a whole series of readouts that are printed on the map, and they will have 63 plus, meaning that for scenarios that are in or after 1863, then the Confederates, typically because they're in Virginia, they have developed this area as a readout hex. So it's an intrinsic defensive fortification of built up lands for that particular hex. If you're playing this for an earlier 1861 or 1862 scenario, and it is possible to use that, then no, those would not exist yet. So just be considered a regular piece of rough terrain, whatever the intrinsic value is of the printed terrain type. So that's a very good question. While I'm here, yes, I will point out that we have creeks. We've got Cedar Run here, which is a light blue creek, and we also have the heavier darker. That is a minor river, and you can see that there are fords across the river, and then you actually have some cases where there are formal bridges where those are typically downstream near Fredericksburg, for example. And let's see, you got one bridge here at Chatham, and then we've got ferries and landings, which play prominently in the advanced game because you can do amphibious movement to move Union troops up the James and up the York River and get them far inland by using some of these landings. We've got the swamps here. So we've got swamps which are in the darker blue or gray. Those are impassable. They will affect retreats and movement. And then we have the lighter green ones here, which you can see. Those are provisional swamps, which in the basic game, they don't typically matter too much. They are considered, they're still passable. They're hard to move into. But if you get into an advanced game and you have a rain event during that turn where there's rain, then these become true swamps and they are impassable. And on the one of the charts, yeah, we've got the inside the little chart window. One of the tabs is the terrain effects, and that will show you all the terrain types, how much it costs to move across them, whether it's a dry day or a rainy day, and it will give you information about whether it's good for artillery, whether it's poor for artillery. All things being equal, you typically want to move, because this is a game about maneuver, you want to move across open fields and easy land. You don't want to go across hills and woods and things like that.
I notice in Hex 4625,
4625,
Hog Bridge, that goes into a gray swamp.
It does. So as long as you are moving along a road, you can pass right on through whatever hex type it is. Yeah. So roads, I can't say enough about roads. Those are the thin black lines here. And again, those come from the original sources. So these are pretty accurate. And as you can see, these are little rural roads that go everywhere. And sometimes when you really need to get from here to there, they just meander all sorts of ways. But they are still the most efficient way to move units around this map. We also have the red lines here, which are the printed railroads that existed at the time. So this is the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad. And those are obviously important in the advanced game for rail movement of troops. Now we've talked about the units on the map. Let's talk about what you do with the units. Obviously, This is an operations level game, so the first part of every game is getting units to where you want them to be. And then the second part of the game is, can you capture that victory point hex? In this case here with the wilderness, you can see that we have preset all of the victory point locations for this scenario with their point values. That's what you see in the blue. That means that the Union currently controls those. And all of the points there for this scenario in the wilderness are with those little indicators right there. Depending on each individual scenario, certain victory point locations are more prominent than others. In this case, I think it was something like, I don't have it immediately in front of me, but I think the Union, after 3 turns in the wilderness, have to have 53 points, and they will get that usually through a combination of capturing victory point locations and inflicting manpower losses and preventing manpower losses of their own. Most of the scenarios in the early parts of the war, say the first 2 or 3 years up to 1863, it's a differential of 1, so depending on who's attacking and who's defending, it'll be +1 or -1 manpower. So for every manpower value that's lost or decreased during combat, that is a victory point that you are earning for your particular side. Later in the war, manpower values and losses become a premium for the Confederates, so you'll often see in most everything after 1863 in the late war, it will be something like +3 Union points if they inflict a casualty on the Confederate, and 2 if the Confederates do it conversely. So there is a slight differential in favor of the Union for inflicting manpower losses, and that often colors people's strategy on whether they're going more for victory point locations or they are just going in there and inflicting blood losses on the opponent. We've talked about the units, we've talked about the map. Here's what you can do. This is a roll and move game, and I've lost half of you right there by saying that, I'm sure. Like, dice, movement, yes, this is just like Monopoly, so when you're playing this on the table and somebody says, oh, you roll dice just like Monopoly, you can say, yes, that is how it works. In this case, it is first you determine initiative. So in every scenario, whether you're playing a basic or an advanced, each of you will have a d6, and the first thing you must determine, unless otherwise told by a scenario, is who gets to go. And you will do that after every action. So you'll roll the d6, and in most situations, here in the Eastern Theater, just depending on the time of the war, the Confederates will win ties. So in this case here, I'm going to use the 2d6 up here, and the convention we often use online is left side is Union, right side is Confederate when you roll the 2d6. So in this case, it's 3 and 5. The Confederate would win that initiative because he rolled the 5 virtually. That means the option goes to the Confederate player to either perform an action or to pass. And in every one of these games, you will have a series of steps. We will have a sequence of play that in most basic stuff is you start with any leader movement that you want to do, and then you have an action cycle. And then when everyone is done everything that they wish to do for that action cycle, then you will finish out the turn, you will have a recovery phase, and if there are multiple days in the scenario, you'll move on to the next day. But the action cycle will proceed and continue, each side rolling a d6 after every action to determine the initiative, and it is quite possible, if you get hot dice, to constantly get the initiative 5, 6, 7 times in a row. And that enrages some people. I understand that. It has happened to me. It will happen to you when you're playing this, because you have the best laid plans. I really need to do this. But if you don't get the initiative, then you just have to sit there and watch while your units are either attacked or the other guy is running off and grabbing all the victory points before you can do anything. And that is just the fortunes of war in this game. But the basic actions that you can do, so you'll roll the d6, you'll determine who gets the next initiative. You can do one of essentially 3 or 4 options per action. You can either activate a single unit to do one of several things. You can activate a leader. So if I wanted to activate just early, I could perform some action with early. If I wanted to, I could, for Yule, activate a leader, in which case then I would be able to activate all of his subordinate units that are within 3 hexes, unimpeded hexes, from that leader. So in this case, I could activate Yule. He would then perform some action on all early, Rhodes, and E. Johnson. Those actions are movement, which we're going to talk about here first. You can do assaults, which is combat from a fixed location to adjacent locations. You can burn railroad stations. That is its own little activity. We don't have any right here immediately in the wilderness, but in several scenarios, burning railroad stations is worth victory points per those scenario rules. And in the advanced game, that is a logistical consideration where you're cutting off lines of supply for your opponent. The other action you have, which is normally only in 1864 and 1865 scenarios, is to entrench as a performed action by that unit. In all scenarios from 1861 and 1862, that is not something that you do as an action. It only occurs during the recovery phase if units are unfatigued, or with an agreement. There's an optional rule in the game rules that units, if you wish, in 1863 can perform entrenchment actions. But I know of nobody that does that in 1863 because oftentimes that completely changes the dynamic of the game. It is very common historically for the Confederates to race to a location, cut down a bunch of trees, build abatis, and obviously Robert E. Lee being the king of spades, he was very much defense oriented, and they would get somewhere and establish defensive bulwarks. So that makes sense in those scenarios of 1864 and 65, less so earlier in the war. And that's it. I mean, when you're playing the basic scenarios, you're marching to places, you're getting there firstest with the mostest, and you're prosecuting battle. Now, we will come back to combat here in a minute, but I'll give you some examples of movement just to show you how it works. All of you have played war games before, so this is not going to be any rocket science for you, but I'm going to give some examples here of how marching works. So let's say I've won the initiative. Yule wishes to activate all 3 of his units here to march. He will provide, since we are doing a leader activation, he will provide an intrinsic bonus to his die roll for the fact that he's doing it. If I was doing it just on an individual unit, then the individual units have some kind of a die roll modifier that is a little skewed towards the Confederates in this case. They do get some bonuses because they are in Virginia. They have local support. They know the terrain a little better than the Union. So they will, on average, and that's one of the little charts that's here in movement on the second tab there, the summary. You can see that on the whole, the U.S. gets no modifier to their basic units moving. They'll get a +1 if one of their leaders is activating, and then the CSA will get a +1 if just a unit is marching. But if a leader activates them, they will get +2. For the most part, there are also some variations on that depending on scenario, but they will get +2 to their movement rolls. So it's much more efficient in this case to activate units with a leader. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to activate Early, Rhodes, and E. Johnson. They are going to get their first fatigue, so every one of these units can perform up to 4 fatigues worth of activities during a day. However, combat can drastically sap them of that. So if they perform poorly in combat, they will get more fatigue, thus they will have fewer opportunities to perform additional actions. And as they get more and more fatigue building up, when they do marches, there's the possibility of straggling, which is called an extended march check. So it is possible for units to become less efficient. Right now, you're seeing them all on their good order side. I'm going to flip Early, for example, just to show you what he looks like when he flips. So you can see when he flips over, he still has 10 manpower. There's still 5,000 men there. However, his combat effectiveness went from a fresh 10 down to this lesser 7, and it's about 66% as effective. That is a consideration when you go into combat of, do I want my unit to be tip top, or am I willing to make a riskier attack by having that unit be less effective because of straggling? So I'm going to put him back to fresh there. And I'm going to roll for Yule. I'm going to say he's activating all 3. I'm going to get a +2 to his die roll. And I roll the die and I get a 6. Wow. I'll never see that like again. So I get 8 movement points to expend to every one of those. So some of you are thinking ahead and seeing how this works. If you activate a unit individually, it's less efficient, but there's more possibilities for you to get a varied movement rate among different units. If you activate them all with a unit, that is truly a crapshoot. If I roll a 1, they all get the base movement. If I roll really well, in this case, they're all going to get to move very fast. So you can see that things will change very, very quickly. So I've got 8 points to spend. Movement along roads is always 1 when it's a nice sunshiny day. So that is going to lead you down that path of, I want to move along roads. Now, we have not even talked about zones of control. Zones of control do exist in this game. It's a fundamental part of this game. So whenever you enter any one of the surrounding hexes of a unit that is, and we'll talk about some exception to that, but if I were to move, say, E. Johnson from here along with Yule, I'm going to move him right to 2410. I have now entered the zone of control of Griffin here. And that means one of 2 things. I must either stop, and he has completed all movement, or I have the option to attack while I'm marching. Depending on how many movement points I have, then there is a sliding scale of effectiveness of what's known as a prepared attack, where you expend 4 movement points, and that gives you a +1 modifier. We're going to come back to all the modifiers and everything in combat here, but suffice to say, I talked about earlier as an assault action. That's where you just decide, I'm going to attempt an attack right now from where I am. Conversely, now we can attack while you're marching. So in this case here, Yule gets right there and he's in Griffin's zone of control, so he decides, ooh, do I wish to attack or do I wish to be finished? And in this case, if we were going to engage in combat, and we'll come back to that here in a few minutes, but you could set things up so that I've got all 3 units moving. It's possible that I could surround somebody. I mean, these particular roads don't help me with that, but in open fields, it is possible to flank people. We're going to talk about flanking modifiers and how and when you'd want to use that. But in this case, this is a blunt hammer. You will just go right for it, and he's got something going in his favor, but he's also considerably smaller. He's half the size of Griffin. So we'll come back to that in a minute, but the rest of this I'll have early move. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Cavalry do not require any additional movement point to move into because it's very flexible. But you'll also notice in this situation here, this is a perfect example. I've got woods in between Early and Griffin. That means this is known as a restricted zone of control. And the difference here is for everything else except for movement, that's considered a zone of control. That means that Early could keep moving and face off against Sedgwick. So I could come up here because Griffin does not exert a zone of control for movement through those woods. Okay, so he went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. He could get all the way up there. Roads could do one of 2 things. I have an option here with roads. If I was going to set up for a subsequent attack, it might be worthwhile for me to get roads and join Yule here, or I could come up and get a nice big surround working towards Griffin here. So I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and just park him there. And now Ewell's got this line of the second corps working against Griffin here. It really just depends on whether or not I want to attack immediately or I'm setting up things for the future. So I think what I'm going to do here is I am going to be a little more conservative, which is surprisingly unlike me. I'm going to have Rhodes go. Well, let me give you an example first. If he wanted to come and join E. Johnson here, you have to take into account the presence of friendly units already in the hex, which means there's some logistics that, come back to the logistics part of this, where I'm trying to move into this hex where there's 9 manpower already in the woods. And if I look at the enter friendly occupied hex on the movement tab, if there's 3 to 11 combined combat value in there, and it's a woods, swamp, or mountain, I would need 3 additional movement points to get in there. So it would cost me 1, 2, plus 3 more. I'd need 5 total movement points to enter into Ewell's hex. Okay, I think I am going to do that. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he is now stacked with Ewell. And that will give Griffin something to consider. If he decides he wants to potentially do an attack against me, now I've got the upper hand. I've got more manpower in this hex than Griffin does. He's got 17, I have 19 total. So that would give my opponent, as the Union, a little bit of pause, right? Maybe he's not going to do that attack after all. Okay, so that's movement. That's pretty much as easy as it gets. You always will move, especially if you're marching with an entire corps, you always march them subsequently, because a lot of people, I see new players, will just pick up a stack like here with Lee and AP Hill, and let's say Heath and Wilcox were stacked together. They'll roll that movement and then they'll just start going 1, 2, 3, but that's not how it works. You have to take into account units that are already in a hex somewhere. So that's why you always need to do them in order of operations. So that's quite important into this game. Cavalry works exactly the same. The only difference is they roll 2D. So they get double the movement rate. And with Stuart, in this example here, he is a all cavalry leader, so he actually gives +3 to the movement. So Jeb and the Confederate cavalry have the ability to move very quickly, very far. So in this case, Stuart would activate Rosser, and he would roll 2D +3. So I'm going to roll that for him just to show you an example. So he rolls an 8, he gets 3 extra, so they can move 11 total movement points. And I didn't even mention that each one of these hexes is just a little over a mile across. So as you're moving, you can kind of think that, oh, he's getting 11 total miles, but that's really if he's just following along roads. So he could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He could come up here, and he has 6 movement points left over, which he could then potentially apply towards an attack. This might be, you'll often see this, cavalry are the whipping boys of most of these scenarios, especially the Union cavalry. So Stuart will oftentimes go hunting for a lot of these weaker cavalry because he's got lots of pluses in his favor. He's got a tactical value that's significantly better. He's got more manpower with him, and they're just babes in the woods here, literally, here at Parker Store. So in this case, he could potentially attack. So I'm going to set him there for a second. Let's talk about one last little thing with movement. Let's say I roll poorly, which happens all the time. A unit can always move a minimum of 1 hex. So no matter what, if they roll poorly, especially with the Union, and they don't have enough movement points, or it's just so for example, to move into these woods here, without a road, it's a 6 to move into those woods. It's very onerous to do that. But a unit can always move at least 1 hex. So in this case, if I wanted to move Rhodes into that hex, I could do that. I could just pull him into there. There are times and considerations also when you're moving from zone of control to another zone of control. So let's say Stuart, in this example down here, let's say he wants to go through the woods to here using that technique that I just talked about, moving a minimum of one. If he does that, if he ever moves from one zone of control hex to another zone of control hex without a road, that will cause him to become disorganized. So if he were to do this sneaky, then I would immediately have to flip Rosser over to his disorganized, because that 5th New York Cavalry is exerting a zone of control along those roads in both directions. So that might not be the wisest thing to do unless I really had, and everything in this game is, I really need to do that. I need to do that right now. So that is a consideration. There are many considerations in this game.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
So when you're moving, is it moving combat all kind of the same impulse, or is there an order to the operation, or is it?
Yes. In this case, anytime you enter that zone of control on that same impulse of movement. So in Yule's case, he had 3 individual moving units. It is possible to do 3 individual attacks, because every single one of them, if they enter a zone of control with a Union unit, then they have the opportunity to attack. And then sometimes it might be good to do what's known as a 1-2 punch, where the first one goes in, he punches, he softens them up a little bit, and then another one comes around on that same impulse, that same activation, also does a march on an attack and hit them from another angle that might be a little more successful. So it really just depends on what you're attempting to do. If you're trying to push somebody out of an area, more often than not, you're better suited to try to get the best modifiers and do less hasty stuff. But there's times when you want to whip around somebody and seize that initiative, get around them, and attack from all angles if possible. So in this case here with Yule, he activated all 3 units, so he could potentially do up to 3 attacks with that same impulse. So, are there any questions so far? Have I lost anybody?
I do have a question about the fatigue.
Okay.
Had the fatigue been marked on those units?
I think I backed it off at one point when I hit the back
Okay.
button. So yeah, they would all be at fatigue level 1 right now. So you can see there's fatigue level 1 in green, and then yellow is 2, then orange is 3, and then red is 4. So that they would be done if they hit that point. Yes. So extended march is another concept of this. I mentioned that, where there is a little chart for that on extended march. On the whole, the Union suffers greatly from that. They have some intrinsic modifiers. Just being the Union, they're going to get a +1 because they're larger and they're unwieldy and they're green and all that good stuff. All the historical circumstances that go into those factors. But as the units get to fatigue level 3 or 4, then they're going to get modifiers themselves. And there's something here. Let me show an example. I got E. Johnson here, right here. If he gets to fatigue level 3 or 4 on this day, then in the next day he would become exhausted, which I've done all 3 of them here, but they would have this white bar across the top. And what that essentially means is they tuckered themselves out so much in the previous day that they are more likely to become disorganized in the next day. So there will be some modifiers on that. Not only that, but they will check earlier at fatigue level 2. Normally you would do it at fatigue level 3, but at fatigue level 2 you will check for extended march, and then it gets worse and worse. You get some modifiers. It's like +1 for fatigue level 3 and +3. And if ever they hit 6, then that is, they have failed their extended march roll. If they are organized, they will become disorganized. If they are already disorganized, then they start bleeding off manpower. And for some of these larger Union divisions, that could be, you could lose 2 or 3 manpower. That's, 1,500 men just decided, hey, look, sir, there's apples over here off the road, and they just, off they go. Or whatever, desertion, however you want to factor those in. So extended march becomes another management part of the game, where, all right, how badly do I need to get this unit from point A to point B today? How much energy am I going to expend to get to this 15-point victory location today? The wilderness in this scenario is 3 turns, so do I go for broke today and suffer the next couple of days. And that's why the advanced game in all of these Great Campaigns titles is it is a different game completely. Many of these little basic scenarios, they are what we call the set piece. They are leading you up to the battle, or in this case, this is the Battle of the Wilderness. It's, a day before, the day of, day after, that kind of stuff. But your considerations in a basic scenario are like, on a one-turn scenario, it's balls to the wall. I'm just going to do whatever I need to do today. Tomorrow does not exist. For today we will die, that kind of thing. In an advanced game, you've got, like Carl was just saying, they played the On to Richmond scenario. The advanced game for that is 120 turns. So there are going to be days when you're very furiously active in getting units in place. Then they're going to have some combat, and then they're going to spend a couple of days resting, and just lather, rinse, repeat. Rain turns will also affect that. It's like, well, it's really hard marching today, so I think we'll just stay in camp and we'll rest up. So that is a whole part of the operations level management for Great Campaigns, which to me cannot be beat. I love playing the advanced campaigns because you just never know what's going to happen, and you just are making those decisions. For those of you who've seen some of the videos that I play with Roger and I spend a minute or two trying to make a consideration about what we're doing. Of course, I chop all of that out. So when you're playing this on the table and there's lots of consideration time, there's going to be moments when you're just rolling the dice, boom, 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 I'm doing this, I know what I need to do right now. And then you're going to be like, oh, here's the puzzle. Okay, how badly do I want to get across that river? What are the chances I'm not going to get that next initiative? So those are all these wonderful, agonizing decisions that you have to make in Great Campaigns.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure. Why, the reason you're all here, of course, is combat. And one of the aspects of the game, in addition to moving places, is prosecuting combat. And for some people, the combat is, I guess, a brain burn, but after you've played this just a little bit, you start to learn the basic modifiers. There are some wonderful cheat sheets and things that you can get on Board Game Geek, where some people have like a little Excel spreadsheet if you want to get that involved with it. Some of them just print it out and you just have like, oh, okay. And to my mind, it's a little checklist. All right, I check these things in this order. These, again, if you've seen Roger and I play, I will put those things into the video to show you, okay, they're getting this bonus, this bonus, this bonus, this demerit, if there are negative modifiers. And then the way the instructions are written for combat is, each side gets positive modifiers, and then you roll your dice, and then you subtract the defender from the attacker, and yada, yada, yada. For a lot of us, that failed algebra a few times, it's easier to just put all the modifiers on one side of the equation and just come up with a basic number that the attacker gets when related to the defender. To me, that's the way I learned it. That's a little way it's easier for everybody. So we will go through all of the modifiers here individually, just so you can understand how they work. But the situation we've got ourselves here is Yule. Yule is right up against the wall here with Griffin. And I'm going to advance things a little bit here. I'm going to say that perhaps Lee and AP Hill and Wilcox got up a little farther, and whatever. But let's say that this is the situation here. I'm going to show you some different ways that we could have done this. Now, in the first example we talked about was attacking on the march. I'm going to show you that example here with Stuart because it's easier, I think, with this smaller unit. A cav on cav, you'll see this very often. But in this case, attacking on the march with cavalry works exactly the same way. The modifiers are for the types of attack are doubled. So like everything else with cavalry, movement is 2d6, so the amount of points that you must expend to attack something are also doubled. If you've got Vassal open and you open up the combat modifiers, I'm going to just talk about these here on the video. The basic considerations from top to bottom are the type of attack, which is under the attack summary on the chart, the leadership, the ratio, the size differential between attacker and defender, and then artillery, and then additional considerations like flanking and terrain. And again, I have sort of a mental checklist that we work through, and that's the way I do it most often, and because I do it, it's really just rote for me now. So the decision really presents itself on, in this case, Stewart got here. He's at fatigue level 1. Rosser is interested in attacking on the march against the 5th New York. So I'm going to let Carl, are you in the room right now?
Yeah, I'm in here.
Awesome. Then you can, if you want to control the 5th New York here for real quick, then I'll let you do the die roll, whatever.
Of us that are about to die, salute you.
Exactly. You should know my rolling skills better than that. But in this case,
Yeah, well,
all right. So
it is fast.
we'll start with. I always have a little cheat sheet here next to me. A little, scratch paper is your friend in this game. So Stewart wishes to attack the 5th New York. The first thing we're going to look at is the attack type, and because I rolled, I think I was like right here. And let's see, 1, 2, yeah, I was right there, and I rolled, and I had a total of 11 points, right? So that's 11 movement points. Well, I spent 3, 1, 2, 3 to get to this point. That means that Rosser has 8 movement points left over, and for those of you keeping track at home, 8 movement points is the exact perfect amount for cavalry to expend to perform a prepared attack. Now, a prepared attack means that they're going to get a +1 die roll modifier to their attack, which is always a good thing. If I opted not to, I would still have those 8 movement points left over, but I would spend 4 of them instead to just do a normal attack. If you're so overwhelming and you've got so many things already going in your favor, then now you can decide to do lesser types of attacks, which that range from, in this case, normal to hasty, which means I don't quite have enough movement points to do it, but I really want to attack them right now, in which case I'll go from no modifier to a -1 to I'm absolutely crazy. I don't want to spend any movement points because this is a case where you have an infantry that's like 15 manpower attacking somebody who's 1 manpower. You're so overwhelming that there's just no point in spending anything on that. You're going to get some negative modifiers, but hey, you're already going to beat them in other factors. So you can decide how much movement on the march you wish to expend. And the reason you do that is because the less you use, you may have some left over, which you could then expend after the combat. Provided everything goes your way, you can expend the rest of your movement points. But in this case, Stewart is going to spend all 8 of his remaining to attack with Rosser. We're going to attack the 5th New York, so I'm going to get a +1 for attacking prepared. And then I will look at Stewart's tactical value here, which is a 3 versus the 5th New York's 1. Well, that's 2 better. So I will say that I get a +2 for my tactical capability because he's there. The next thing I will look at is manpower values. So I'm attacking with 2 manpower versus the 5th New York's 1 manpower. So I am 2 to 1. So if we look on that chart again, 2 to 1, and it's really easy. It's whatever that number is, 2 to 1. It's 1 less than that is your modifier. So 2 to 1 in this case gives me a +1 modifier. So I got +1 for my ratio, and if I had anything else, like if they were in breastworks, they would get some modifiers, and then I would take that away, or if I was attacking across a creek, or if it was raining, or if I had a flank on this, all of those additional modifiers, which I won't go into just at the moment, those would come into play. But on its head right now, I've got a total of +4. I will also look at artillery, but I have 2 things going in my favor. One, I'm attacking into woods, and you never use artillery in the woods because there's too many trees. So even if he did have artillery, that would not be a factor here. In addition, normally you would look at the difference between the attacker's number and the defender's number, and what the attacker wants to do is have at least 2 more pieces of artillery or 2 more batteries than the defender. That's a standing rule of thumb, because if you have at least 2 more, then you don't even worry about it. And this has changed a lot. This is another aspect that has changed from the original first 6 titles or 7 titles up through on to Richmond in 1998. They all had individual artillery calculations. All of that has been pushed aside for the standard series rules calculations, which are significantly easier. Basically, you just compare attacker and defender, you look at the type of terrain that you're attacking into, and that number is then added or subtracted. Obviously, attacking against well-entrenched artillery in an open field or rolling hills is going to be very bad for the attacker. So again, Patrick's wisdom for you, don't do that. But in this case, we're attacking Parker's store in the woods. There's no artillery at play. So all things have been calculated. I get a +4 to my die roll modifier for Stuart. So the attacker will roll first. I will roll a 6, hurrah! +4 becomes a 10. And
okay.
And go ahead.
I will roll.
He rolls a
6.
6. Boo! Boo to you and your 5th New York carbines. So the difference now is simply a +4. And I will open up the combat results chart here. This is our first chance to look at that. And the combat results chart is what I like to call sanguine, because it's bloody for everybody. And you have to really want to attack and be in a good position to attack, because it is pretty unforgiving. So in this case, I looked down the attacker's combat value. I had 2 manpower, so I'm between 1/2 and 3, so I'm in that very first column. And I come down to a +4, which case means that I get a little f and a little a. And when we look down here, we see that the little f means I'm going to get a fatigue added. So they get a little exhausted from this, a little tired, and I can advance into the hex. Whereas for our stalwart defenders, who got a +4, they get a big D and a big R, which the little r means that they retreat, no big deal, they're going to become disorganized. But in this case, the 5th New York will actually be routed away. So but there was no number, because they're so small, I did not inflict enough damage on them to actually kill them. I didn't do any manpower losses. So all I ended up doing was, in this case, I turned them that D1, which is demoralized. So they're going to get on their horses and move away. And we'll come back and we'll talk about, well, I guess now's a good chance to talk about retreat. The little r means that a unit must retreat anywhere from 2 hexes away following a priority chart, which is listed on there. So anywhere from 2 up to 4 hexes away. So it's a good opportunity for them to get away. So down at the bottom, you can see the summary of combat results. You can see the difference with big D. D means they will always disorganize, so they're going to flip from good order to that lesser quality. For 1, it means they're going to be down to a 1/2. Then you can see big F, little f, and they just get worse and worse. If you roll well enough to get anything but the E for end action or disorganized or whatever, then the unit that attacked could still continue on and expend their movement points. However, in this case, I got a little fatigue, which means I'm going to add 1, but they're still in good order. So Rosser is now just at fatigue level 2. And then the 5th New York, because I did a big R, they are routed away, which means they have to go a minimum of 4 hexes away up to 6. So this is where Carl would decide, using the priority chart. There's a whole lot of verbiage there on the text, and that gets into some very specific cases. But the easiest way for most new players to learn is you want to go farther away from the attacker by road whenever possible. So in this case, you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, at minimum of 4 and up to 6. And he will be gone. Because I rolled an A as well, that means I could advance into that hex. And if it was infantry, I could capture that hex, but because he is a cavalry unit, I cannot capture that hex. I can occupy it, but it does nothing from my victory point captures. Okay, so that was an attack on the march. What we're going to do next is a different version of that, calling an assault, which is a full action. I win the initiative, so this would complete Stuart's movement. I would then roll the next initiative. It would then be a Union activation because he won the initiative with a 6. So then he could respond in kind and do whatever, and then we keep rolling. But hopefully you want a string of initiatives. So that's attacking on the march. Let's do another example here with Yule. And I'm going to try to make I'm going to do a couple of different things here. First, I'm going to just show you what an assault looks like. Okay, the Confederates have won the activation. Yule wishes to now attempt an assault on Griffin, who is adjacent, and he wants to potentially use both of these units. Okay, so the first thing that you do, the leader must be in the stack with those 2 units, or multiple units, and he indicates how many units he wishes to potentially participate. And this is where it gets a little hairy, because this is a decision tree that, from beginning players to intermediate and advanced players, they will all make decisions a little differently on this depending on what they want to happen. But let's say I'm going to attack Griffin and I'm full of piss and vinegar, and I think I'm going to do it. I can whip them, right? So I'm going to have Yule activate both E. Johnson and Rhodes for potentially attack. So I assign a fatigue to both of them. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to, but I have to give them a fatigue just for the attempt. All right. Now, the all-important command roll. I'm going to roll a die and compare it to Yule's command value. Right off the top, if it's a 6, it's just an automatic failure. You watch the videos, you'll see that happens a lot. I really need to attack this guy. Not today, sir. Not today. So that's just an automatic failure. Any other number from 1 to 5, you will then subtract from their command value. And that is the number of units that you activate that can actually receive those orders. So I'm going to roll now for Yule. Here we go. He rolls a 4. So I subtract 4 from 6, and whew, I get 2. That means both of these units can participate in the assault. Okay, so I have now one more choice. I can either go in with these 2 units, and it would be an attack of 19 versus 17, or at this point, because I have another unit, I have multiple units adjacent to Griffin, I can send a runner out to Lee, and because Lee is within command radius of Yule, he's within 3 hexes, I can request to do a grand assault, which means that I could now bring in potentially more units from additional hexes, all to participate in that same attack.
This is where you cue the epic music.
Bum, 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 bum. So let's send a runner to Lee. Oh, let's talk about some specifics here. It is possible here where we would have units with a command value of like a 4 or a 5 on some of these. Like Yule has a really nice one. So let's say he was a 5 and I rolled a 5. Okay, 5 minus 5 is 0. Now, that assault did not fail. It can still happen. The problem is I can only do a maximum of 1 unit. So I'd have to choose which one, Rhodes or E. Johnson, that would go in. So if I had rolled the 5 in this case, also, that'd be 6 minus 5, which is 1. So again, I would still have to pick 1. But the difference here is a 0 for a normal assault when you're making the command roll is not a failure. Only a 6 is a failure. But with Lee, if you're trying to make a grand assault, if you don't get a 0 is a failure for a grand assault. So if I rolled a 6 on that, of course, it'd still be a failure. But if he was like in the case with Grant up here, we see often with the Union, you roll a 5, that is 5 minus 5 is a 0. So that is a failed grand assault. But Lee is a little more likely, he's got some better odds. Only a 6 is going to fail. So let's try. Here's a grand assault attempt. Oh! Send in Pickett and Pettigrew. As it stands right now, the grand assault failed, so it's just going to be E. Johnson and Rhodes that are going against Griffin.
Lee's having his lunch.
That's right. Well, guy had heart problems. It's low fat. Yeah. It's yogurt day. I'm going to roll just again. It's a 4. So in this case, If things had been going my way and I rolled a 4, then I subtract that from Lee's command value of 6. And that number is the number of total additional hexes, not units, but hexes that can participate. So if you got stacks of units in additional hexes, I can now bring in 2 more hexes. But in this case, I only had Early and First North Carolina. Those are 2 more hexes. I could, in that situation, add them to the initial attack. So then that would
Or
give me
that's beyond the initial attack.
beyond, yeah. So in this case, I have 19 from the initial assault, but with the grand assault, I would get 11 more manpower all attacking. So I would have 30 to 17. Now,
Right.
that is one of the big considerations of the game, because if you look on the attacker's combat chart, once you start getting into these big numbers of manpower, even on a good attack, you're still going to take manpower losses because there's so many bodies in the field getting shot. It's just, but that could be the difference of giving you a +1 or +2 modifier if you bring more manpower in. So again, all those wonderful agonizing decisions that you have to test against the die roll. But in this case, we're just going to do a straight up Ewell attack since we did fail our grand assault. I've got 19 to 17. So the first thing I get is a +1 for an assault, which is like a prepared attack. I get +2 because the tactical rating of Ewell is 2 better than Griffin. I would look at manpower now. I have 19 to 17. That is 1 to 1. So I get nothing for that. It's not like when Stewart attacked. In this case here, I've got 6 pieces of artillery against 2, but again, I'm attacking into woods, so there's no artillery ever used in the woods. So all I have for this, that's it, is just a +3 modifier to my die roll. Okay, so I'm going to roll for Ewell. Here's my roll of +3 to this attack. Oh, man. I'm rolling 6s all
There
night.
it is.
So I got a 9.
Wow. We will receive. Let's see what I got.
Oh, okay. Not so bad.
Okay, average, I'll take it.
So 9 versus 3 is a +6 in my favor. So now I will look at the combat chart and I will see that I had 19 and I get a +6. I come all the way down. So I'm still going to lose 1 manpower for the attack, but I get to advance into the hex when it's done. He had 17 and he was the defender and it's +6. So he will lose 3 manpower right off the top. And he will have become disorganized and he will rout away. And you can see this one's in italics. I don't know if you can see it closely, but in some games those italics mean possibility of Union panic, which would cause some other nasty effects down the pike. But in this particular game, in the Overland campaign, the Union panic's not a factor. So Carl would lose 3 immediately off the top from Griffin. He would go down to a 14 manpower. He would flip over. So I'll flip him. So we'll reduce him 1, 2, 3, become disorganized and demoralized. So you can see it flips over, and that's some of the nice automation here. That D1 means he's demoralized, and whenever they're demoralized, they have no artillery. That's why it's a little crossed out there. And you can see that his combat effectiveness in the future is 10 rather than 14. And because he is demoralized, he will have to run away a minimum of 4 hexes and a maximum of 6. And so in this case, he would go. He could go.
Am I allowed to do my own units on this, or does it?
You are. However, in this case, early is because I said that the woods block block only movement. He is still exerting a zone of control into there. So your highest priority is to get into a non-Zoc, which would be there, right?
Right.
And that could have nasty ramifications, because if we look on our retreat priorities, let's see, number 1 was not a factor because he didn't follow a road. Number 2, he didn't follow a road, but he is farther away, and it's not in an enemy zone of control or enemy occupied, so he would come down to priority number 2. He doesn't lose any manpower because thankfully, there's no influence. But some of these retreats, if the attacker sets them up right and has a blanket of zones of control around a unit, you can make not only the combat effective because you'll kill units right off the top, but then the units will suffer more in the retreat losses because they're in true panic and scattering. But in this case, now he's gone 1 away from the attacker. There's still no roads, 2 away, but now he can start following roads 3 and 4. Okay.
Right.
And then he could do an additional 2 more with the demoralize because he can go up to 6 if he wants. And then you have a little more flexibility. You'll notice on the retreat charts, retreat chart 1 is very specific and prescribed for the first X. Usually 1 for a small retreat, up to 4 for the full retreat. And then over here, if you're going those additional ones on the retreat chart too, it's a little more forgiving. It's basically just saying, hey, you can go anywhere you want as long as you don't get closer than where you were. Same distance is okay, but you can't get closer to an attacker than you from the hex that you just left. Or can you be in a zone of control? And you can see how priorities go from 1 to 2 to 3, and by the time you're getting into priority 5 on the main one, that means you're trying to retreat. You're completely surrounded, and you're retreating through all enemy units, and at that point you're losing 3 manpower from every unit. So this is where if you attack a stack of, say, 3 units, and they're all forced to retreat through one of yours, that's 3 per unit, and that can be incredible. That's 9 manpower that you'll lose just for that first hex. Pretty bad. And if points are a premium based on manpower losses, then you could really put a hurting on somebody. Let's go out in here into the open field. I'm going to give you just a basic concept of how flanking can make your life better when you're attacking. So I'm going to bring Yule out here into the open. Let's say he's got out here, and he's going to attack poor Mott. Let's give an example here. We'll start with a variety of situations here. We're going to talk about flanking. As Carl will say, it can get a little tedious for some players. After a while, again, you can kind of look at the situation on the terrain and go, oh, that's easy. So in the basic rules for flanking modifiers are assessed on the attack. So in this case, poor Mott has got himself surrounded here by Rhodes and Yule. And all things being equal, if ever we've got a situation like this where you've got 2 friendlies attacking someone and all of the hexes surrounding that unit are covered, so you do it in 2 steps. The first step is you calculate how many hexes around the defending unit are, quote, covered. And that, in this case, is the most extreme situation. I've got Rhodes here who exerts Zox here and here, plus the one he's obviously in. And then Yule is here, and the one he's in. Step 1 is you calculate that all 6 hexes are covered. And that qualifies you to the very amazing +4 bonus, right? So you get a +4 for your flanking on Mott.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail, exactly so. Okay, let's say Rhodes was here instead, and now we look at it and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes covered. That is half as effective. That's only a +2 to your die roll modifier. So not as good, but still, hey, +2, nothing to sneeze at. All right, and then from there you start getting into other circumstances and situations. I'm going to bring I'll bring Sheridan down here and show you an example here. If Sheridan was here, well, let's make it even. Let's start with the most extreme again. In this situation here, again, we've still got step 1, 6 hexes covered. All good. Step 2, then you start deducting anything that would be taken away based on terrain and presence of units that are friendly to the defender. So in this case here, Mott being the Union, Sheridan also the Union. Sheridan will now take that initial +4 that I got in step 1, and because I've got 1 friendly there for the Union, he will now subtract 1. So instead of getting that final +4, I actually get +3, which is still not bad. It's better than 2. And so step 1 is always you figure out what you cover, And that's where a lot of the new players are just like, I'm totally lost. But
Mhm.
basically, if you are on opposite sides of a defending unit, that's good. You're gonna get it. And in this situation here, we're talking about retreat priorities. Let's say Yule attacks Mott and he kicks his butt and he forces him to retreat. Well, the first thing he has to do is either he's got to move away from Yule. So I'm going to just pull Sheridan out of here because he's not a factor at the moment. But in that retreat situation, he would have to go this way or this way. And you'll notice that there are no roads connecting where we're going. We don't need roads, but here there are no roads connecting. That would be bad for Mott because they're running in chaos. They are still going from a zone of control to another zone of control without a road. And if we look on that retreat priority, that could be problematic for them because
That's yucky.
that's 4 in this case. It's the second 4, which is we call 4B, but they're equal. And you notice that he has to lose a manpower because he's going from this zone of control to this one without a road. So either one of these, he's going to lose manpower on the retreat. Again, that's when you get a little more skilled with the situation here and reading the map and setting up your attacks, then you can cause initial damage to a unit just by attacking it, and then even more so by his retreat. But coming back to the flank calculation here, we saw that situation where it's +4 for all 6 of these hexes are covered in step 1, and then you subtract 1 for having a defender friendly unit here. Okay, and even more so if it was like that, you would subtract 2. You will keep subtracting until you'll always get a minimum for step 1. If you have all 6 hexes covered, you always get a minimum of a +1 bonus. So no matter how many things they take away from you, you'll always get a +1 for that. Um, there's also something that Mott can do if he sees things are getting bad for him and he starts to realize he's going to get flanked. He can always put up a flanks refused marker, which is a way if you're marching into a place and you know that you're potentially going to get surrounded later on, as you're marching, you expend a movement point and you put up a flanks refused. That has good and bad uses. In this case here, this would be fantastic because it would reduce this +4, presuming no friendlies are there, put them off to the side. In this case here, that flanks refused now reduces that +4 final flank down to a +2. So again, still terrible, but not as bad as a +4 to their attack. So flanks refused is another way you can potentially offset disaster if that goes. And then beyond that, flanking can get really, in situations like this where the unit is in the woods, you can get into like, remember I said that woods count for everything normally except for movement. Well, that's true, but you also have to factor that into flanking calculations. So in this situation here, we're totally surrounding him again. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But in step 2, you'll now subtract because roads does not he does not have a road connecting himself into those woods. So the way to think of it, I often say this on the videos, is it giveth and it taketh away. In step 1, it counts toward it, but then you have to reduce it by 1. So this final flank of +4 would then reduce it down by 1 because those woods come off of the equation. So whenever you're playing the game, what you're trying to do through a variety of either like this directly on opposite sides of a unit or having units over here that exert zones of control into that, you can set up these very wonderful flanks, and that's always part of the attack calculus that you do in your brain. And I said calculus, and half of you are like, "Oh my god!" But it's really not that bad. But terrain is a significant factor. Presence of friendlies, in this case here. Somebody want to take a crack at what they think the flank would be on this one? No wrong answers, just slightly less than correct.
Let's see. He's got 6 minus 2, I would say.
You would be correct, sir, because we got the 6 covered, as we've seen, including the forest. And then in the second step, you would remove the presence of a friendly, and you would remove the forest because there's no road connecting from roads. Okay, so this final flank would be reduced from a +4 down to a +2. What about that situation there? What would happen? He's got a flanks refused on him now.
So that would be another reduction of the flank. I want to say that's -2 again.
Well, in this case, because you've got all 6 hexes covered, no matter what, it's always going to be reduced down to a minimum of a +1. Yeah.
Right.
So you could take off like 3 or 4 things or whatever, but yeah, he's always going to get the +1, even just for the presence of a flanks refused marker there. And that is a consideration like that for some people who are particularly cautious. Let's say he's just out here and Mott just afraid there's enemies everywhere, the knives are all out, and Yule just happens to come up next to him and wants to attack. Well, no, there's no flank, but now because they're so overly cautious and they've organized themselves on the battlefield expecting to be attacked from the flanks, well, now Yule can just come in here and attack him, and because there is no other flank, that flanks refused marker being there gives Yule a benefit. It gives him a +1 for attacking. So that's where I was saying that you kind of want to read the terrain, and when these units get to a place, how they want to defend it. Can they be surrounded? These are all rich and delicious decisions that you have to make as a field commander, because all it takes is one person who gets a string of 3 or 4 initiatives to exploit that and surround you and attack. Let's see, so we've done the major parts of this. We've talked about, let's see what time. Oh, we're right at 90 minutes. That's exactly the way I wanted this to be. So let me talk about here on the screen, just pointing out that there are the series rules. You can get a lot of these resources on the Great Campaigns downloads page. You can see that they've got the series rules and charts all available for free, and they have game-specific rules. Through much lobbying and requesting, they have decided to finally put those out there, much like GMT does with the living rules. So those are all available to you if you want to just go through and peruse them. You can read through the scenarios. It's a great way to just kind of get an idea of how the point values work, and the best part about them is at the end of every one of these. So for example, in Grant Takes Command 2 here, at the very back of the module, they will have this incredible, and this incredible, the game is history after the advanced game. So the game is history in all of the titles since 2009. I guess Mike Bellis he had worked on it. Ed Beach and Chris Withers have joined in, and it's a consortium of effort now with Multiman as far as the designers. And the next title that's coming out after On to Richmond here is the Vicksburg campaign. And then after that, the plan is to repackage and revitalize the Stonewall in the Valley, which will be all of Jackson's Valley campaign from 1862, and they will bundle in another module of Sheridan in the Valley. So Sheridan's 1864 Valley campaign. So that's probably, I would say, 3 to 4 years out, whereas Vicksburg is probably 2 years. I'm being conservative here.
Right.
But yeah, that's what's in the pipeline as far as I know. They are playtesting Vicksburg right now. I know Roger's been taking part of that. So I'm pretty excited because now, even farther west than what we've seen just in the last few years. And it's going to be a challenge unto itself. And let's see, there's the channel, there's Patrick's Tactics. So if you want to go back and watch some of these videos, like I said, I'm going to put this one back out there for everybody. I will reduce the number of ums and uhs by editing it, of course. But there's a lot of material out there. You can see I've got the stuff curated in playlists, so you can see as Roger and I have played through many of these titles over the last 4 years. We've got them organized, plus I've got Combat Commander, Commands and Colors, and all that good stuff. So free plug for you there.
There you go.
But I will certainly entertain any questions, or if you need to see an example of something, I'd be happy to do it for you. But that's the bulk of what I've got for now. I've shown you how to move around the map. I've shown you how to kill things. And we've talked about flanks a little bit and retreats a tad. And you get much more information in depth and examples, of course, in in the series of videos. But I want to thank Brant for having me here, and I want to thank you all for being so attentive. Final questions? Anything?
The title before this one was Hood Strikes North.
Correct. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
John Bell
Is that
Hood's
still,
Tennessee.
is that still in print?
It is still in print. Yeah, I think it was on the website. Let's see.
Anyone who doesn't own one of these, that's a good kind of one map
It's excellent for a starting point. Yeah.
point. If you're interested, it's a little more digestible. Or if you want to jump in the deep end, I mean,
And like I said, I will encourage folks that if you have the opportunity to get any of the older titles with just a little bit of modification, and there are some things that you can get just on BGG, like originally the skirmisher that's listed here, they put out a little mini counter sheet that changed a lot of the leaders' combat values just to make them more in line with, I guess, scholarship at the time and balance from what they saw. But I'm sure, absolutely sure, somebody's friend on the internet has scanned those and put them perhaps on Board Game Geek or something. But even if you just make little notes saying, oh, Stonewall Jackson's not actually a 5 anymore, he's a 4, you can still retrofit those with the current series rules to play these things. And you can save yourself a lot of money. I'm not trying to take anything from MMP, of course, but I encourage you to get the new hotness. But if you just want to dip your foot in the pool, definitely take advantage of the stuff that's cheap online in the secondary market. Yeah.
but the maps, I will say, are better in the MMP versions now.
Oh,
They've
much so. Yeah, very much.
just readability wise, they're much better. So just be warned.
Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. EG, you got something?
I was gonna say thank you for putting this on. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you very much. And if you ever need anything, feel free to. I think my email address is on the channel. It's certainly easy enough to get a hold of me. So feel free to post anything here in the text area for this channel. I'll be happy to answer any questions after the fact if you think of something at breakfast tomorrow. And otherwise, I will leave you to it. And thank you very much for being here tonight.